October 1856. 5 overseers found butchered with sickles. No suspects, no trials, no survivors willing to speak. What happened on that Alabama plantation? Was it a revolt or something far older rising from the soil? Why do locals still avoid the land? Where Hollow Creek once stood, and why more than a century later does the earth there still refuse to forget? Some say it was justice, others say the harvest never ended. If you want to follow real stories that defy time and reveal hidden truths, subscribe to the channel now and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our investigations. The year was 1856. Deep in the southeastern stretch of Alabama, nestled along the churning banks of the Chattahoochee River, stood Hollow Creek Plantation, a vast, fertile sprawl of land surrounded by cypress groves, pale fogs, and the rhythmic hiss-off cicadas. It was one of the most profitable cotton estates in the state, operated by nearly 200 enslaved men, women, and children. The main house, 2 stories of faded white brick and green shutters, overlooked miles of cotton fields and the shacks of those who toiled within them. But Hollow Creek's legacy would not be written in ledgers or production records. It would be whispered in secret among generations, as a place where something terrible had once awoken. Historians have long noted the unusual gaps in the estate's documentation. Between October and December of 1856, Hollow Creek disappears from agricultural logs, local tax records, and plantation correspondences. In the Barber County archives, a single notation appears in red ink beside its name: Operation suspended, incident under review. What exactly that incident was, few dared to record. Yet for years afterward, former residents of the area, free and enslaved alike, told fragments of a tale too horrific to be folklore and too incomplete to be fact. They spoke of a harvest season that began like any other, with wagons creaking across dry soil, the smell of dust and cotton sapin the air. But by mid-October, the workers had grown increasingly silent. Reports, most second-hand, preserved only through family letters or lost diary pages, mentioned sleepless nights, unease in the quarters, and strange chanting hard at dusk, carried on the wind like a lamentation. Overseers dismissed these claims, punishing the more superstitious among the workers, but the whispers did not stop. The head overseer, Enoch Merritt, was known for his cruelty and precision. He had introduced new quotas and punishments that year, harsh even by the brutal norms of the South. Under his watch, several enslaved workers had disappeared for minor infractions. One of them, a man named Josiah, had reportedly been confined for 3 days in Adry Well as punishment for looking a white man in the eye. He was never seen again. It was in this suffocating atmosphere of blood, dust, and fear that the first scream broke the air. Witnesses later claimed it came from the eastern field just after midnight on the night of October 12th. Then came another and another. By dawn, 5 overseers would be dead, each mutilated with a sickle, their remains found scattered in the furrows among the cotton plants. But no one outside the plantation would know this yet. Not officially. The surviving staff and family members offered no statements. The plantation gates were closed to travelers, and for weeks the local authorities were kept at bay by bribes and silence. When investigators finally arrived, Hollow Creek was nearly deserted. The main house was empty, the fields unworked, the quarters abandoned. Only a few blood-stained tools and scorched earth remained, as evidence that something had happened there, something that no one wished to remember. And yet, the land remembered. October 12, 1856 began like every other day at Hollow Creek Plantation, with the sound of the horn echoing over the fields before dawn, summoning the enslaved workers to labor. The cotton was at its peak, snow-white tufts, bursting from their bowls beneath a pale to oppressive sky. Overseers barked orders, cracking their whips in the humid air. The harvest was urgent, the deadline strict. Every hand had to contribute, no exceptions. But that day, something was different. Enoch Merritt, the head overseer, noticed the workers' eyes. They avoided his gaze more than usual, not in fear, but with something, closer to disdain. A quiet resolve pulsed among them, subtle but unmistakable. Their movements were efficient yet heavy, like people executing a plan they did not speak aloud. The usual murmuring of prayer and song had ceased entirely. There was no humming, no weeping, no sound but the rustle of cotton and the crunch of boots on dry dirt. By sunset, a tense stillness settled over the plantation. The sky burned red with twilight as thelast bales were hauled toward the storage barn. Then the sun dipped behind the trees and the real night began. What happened in the following hours was never officially recorded. Most of what is known comes from second-hand accounts and 2 surviving journal entries. One from a traveling preacher who had stayed nearby. The other from Sarah Alcott, a young relative of the plantation owner who had been visiting from Georgia. The preacher wrote of hearing cries that began sometime around midnight. Not cries of punishment or drunken quarrels. Those were familiar enough, but something primal. The sound was like a chorus of agony, he wrote, rising and falling as if the earth itself was wailing. Sarah Alcott's entry, dated October 13, 1856, simply reads, "I was awoken by fire light through the window. I looked out and saw the barn of flame, and then I saw Enoch running. He stumbled. Something followed him. I could not make it out, but it gleamed. When the fire was extinguished the next morning, 5 bodies were discovered across different parts of the plantation. All of them were overseers. None of them had died quickly. Enoch Merritt's corpse was found. Near the cane press, his throat and wrists slit with near surgical precision. 2 others, Warren and Tilson, were discovered in the cotton field, partially buried in shallow trenches, their faces obscured by harvested cotton. The 4th, Benjamin Rhee, was hanging by his ankles in the smokehouse, eyes removed. The 5th, Daniel Cobb, was the only one still clutching a weapon. He had tried to defend himself. His chest was opened, ribs split like a cracked fruit. Each scene bore the same eerie signature. The murder weapon was a sickle, the kind used for harvesting. One was even left embedded in a support beam near the barn door, smeared with blood, as if placed there deliberately. No enslaved workers were found. Their quarters were abandoned, beds empty, belongings left behind. It was as though they had vanished or fled. The plantation owner, Elias Holey, was not present during the massacre. He had been traveling immobile. Upon returning, he refused to speak to the press or local officials. In a letter to his brother, later leaked to abolitionist circles, he wrote, "They reaped us, Caleb. They reaped Therapers." What unfolded that night was not just a revolt. It was precise, coordinated, symbolic, and then came the silence. In the days following their massacre, Hollow Creek became a void on the map, spoken of in murmurs as avoided by travelers and omitted from the usual routes of trade and patrol. But in a state built on order and property, silence could not endure forever. Within a week, the Barber County militia arrived. 30 men, armed and grim, were dispatched not to investigate, but to contain. They were not sent to uncover truth. They were sent to restore control. What they found shocked even hardened veterans of frontier justice. The plantation had decayed with unnatural speed. The fields, once rigidly aligned, appeared disturbed. The soil upturned in great swaths, as if something had clawed its way through the earth. The barn was little more than blackened timber and ash. The overseer's remains had already begun to rot beneath swarms of flies, and the house, though untouched by fire, wreathed of smoke and iron. The enslaved population, nearly 200 strong, was missing. All but 14. The 14 were captured near the river's edge, hiding in a ravine. They did not resist, they did not speak. When questioned, they stared past their interrogators with a strange calm, a silence not of fear but of completion. The militia, interpreting their stillness as defiance, delivered swift, brutal judgment. Without trial, all 14 were executed by hanging from the cypress trees that bordered the property. Their names were never recorded. No clergy attended. No graves were dug. Official records list the cause as an agricultural terror event. An absurd and sterile phrase that appears in precisely one document, a report submitted to the governor's office, and promptly sealed. Yet artifacts began to surface. In 1892, a local pastor researching family genealogies discovered a bundle of scorched pages hidden beneath the floorboards of an abandoned church in Eufaula. The writings faded and fragmented, appeared to be from a journal believed to have belonged to Anna Holé, Elias's daughter. One page reads, "They sang in the fields again, but not the old songs. These had no words, only rhythm. I felt it in my bones, like thunder underground. Father told Enoch to stop them. That night Josiah was taken. Another, the symbols on the barn door are back, scratched deep. I drew them here. They are not letters. They do not belong to us." Alongside her sketches were sigils, unknown to any known alphabet, curved interwoven like vines or veins. But it was a final entry that drew the most scrutiny. Dated October 10th, 2 days before the massacre, it contained a single Latin phrase written over and over, ex sanguine libertas, from blood, freedom. Modern scholars and occult historians have debated the meaning and origin of these words. Some see them as metaphor, others as invocation, but the suggestion is undeniable. The revolt may not have been spontaneous. It may have been ritual. Stranger still, in 1968, a team of state archaeologists surveying the area for a proposed industrial project uncovered a series of shallow pits beneath the original quarters. Inside were tools arranged in geometric patterns, sickles, hammers, knives, deliberately placed rusted but intact. Beneath one, fragments of carved bone. The archaeologists abandoned the project. No official report was released. To this day, the land where Hollow Creek answer stood remains undeveloped, a wilderness of thick brush and choking vines. Locals say the soil rejects the plow, crops rot before ripening, and at night under the moss-laden canopy of trees, the air still smells faintly of iron. Time moved on. The Civil War came and went, and with it the collapse of the southern slave economy. The names of men like Elias Holé and Enoch Merritt faded from history books, reduced to footnotes in legal archives and faded ledgers. Hollow Creek was sold, abandoned, and eventually absorbed by the forest. The cotton fields became overgrown thicket. The quarters sank into ruin, and the main house collapsed in a storm sometime in the 1880s. But the memory of what happened there, of what truly transpired on the night of October 12, 1856, did not die. It migrated instead into the mouths of those who had no written language. Descendants of the enslaved, scattered across Alabama and Georgia, carried with them a story not told as history, but as warning. They called it the night the earth woke. In interviews conducted in the 1930s as part of the Federal Writers Project, several elderly African Amines referenced a tale passed down from their grandparents. One man, Isaac Toiver, then in his 80s, recounted, "My grandmama used to say there was a place where the cotton bled. Folks went quiet in them fields. They say the soil heard the cries and one night it answered." These stories shared common elements: visions of ancestors rising from the soil, ghostly chanting in forgotten tongues, and sickles moving through the dark, not by human hands, but by will. Some spoke of the buried drums, others of a circle cut into Thieland. Few gave names. None dared to say Hollow Creek. By the mid-10th century, folklorists began collecting these accounts in earnest. What they found defied easy categorization. The testimonies were consistent in structure but divergent in detail. Some described the overseers as being taken by shadows, others by fire, and one by insects swarming from his own mouth. But always the theme was the same: retribution, not chaos, a reaping. In 1974, a professor of anthropology from Auburn University, Dr. Lyle Winston, visited the site believed to be Hollow Creek. He brought a small team, ground-penetrating radar, and cautious optimism. What he found confounded explanation in the clearing where the main house had once stood. They detected subterranean anomalies, voids, and deposits inconsistent with natural sediment. Digging revealed layers of charred wood, broken pottery, and in one section, a human tooth embedded in a blackened sickle blade. Notably, the tool was found resting in what appeared to be a deliberate arrangement, the point directed toward true north, surrounded by 5 stones, forming a pentagon. Dr. Winston published a paper titled Geospiritual Residue in Southern Folk Sites, but his conclusions were carefully couched. He suggested that the site may have been used for ritualized mourning or cultural expression. Yet in private letters to colleagues, later published posthumously, he confessed his unease. We did not find what was buried there. We found what had been sealed. In recent years, amateur ghost hunters and paranormal enthusiasts have descended on the area. Most return with blurry photographs and stories of malfunctioning equipment. A few clamour. One man, a podcaster from Birmingham, described walking the grounds alone at twilight and hearing what he described as wet footsteps behind him. He turned, and no one was there. But he later discovered 5 parallel cuts running down his backpack as if traced by claws or blades. And yet, the question remains, if this was a revolt, who led it? If it was a ritual, who taught them the rites? There are no names, no manifestos, only symbols, whispers and wounds in the earth. But sometimes silence is its own kind of testimony. Today, nothing remains of Hollow Creek Plantation but a patch off-roll land where even the bravest locals refuse to walk after dark. The area, now listed simply as Parcel 17A in county records, is overgrown with tangled brush, black moss and saplings that never fully mature. Hunters avoid it, surveyors abandon it, and those who try to claim it for development, loggers, farmers, land speculators, report a strange sequence of failures. Equipment breaks, engines stall, tools go missing. Livestock born nearby often emerge still and malformed. Yet, despite its eraser from maps and memory, Thestry persists. Not in textbooks, but in symbols scratched into the bark of trees, in the faint scorch marks that reappear each autumn near the center of the lot, and in the testimony of those who wander. Too close and return changed. In 2003, a team of environmental scientists from Auburn University conducted soil sampling across Barber County to investigate legacy pollutants from 19th century agriculture. Hollow Creek, then only known as Sample Site 17A, yielded anomalous results. The soil there showed unnatural levels of decayed organic matter, inconsistent with plant decomposition. One technician described the findings off the record as organic saturation, more typical of a mass grave than a cotton field. They were advised to stop testing. A year later, a storm uprooted several old trees on the property, exposing something long buried beneath the roots. Remnants of iron tools twisted into unnatural shapes had a series of concentric rings carved into the clay. An independent photographer who captured images of the site claimed that when developed, the negatives bore faint outlines of human figures, though no one had been present. In the broader cultural consciousness, Hollow Creek exists only on the periphery. It is absent from plantation tourism routes, rarely mentioned in museums and ignored in documentaries. And yet the symbols tied to its legend appear elsewhere, etched into the walls of ruins in Mississippi, carved on hidden panels of slave cabins preserved in Georgia, even traced in chalk during Galagitchi funerals along the South Carolina coast. What binds them is not place but memory, a memory that refuses to die. Some believe Hollow Creek was the site of a spiritual rupture, a place where centuries of suffering reached critical mass and broke the fabric between worlds. Others argue it was a coded uprising, led by clandestine spiritual leaders using ancient African traditions hidden in plain sight. Still others whisper that it was neither of those things, but rather a harvest of another kind, a harvest of blood, debt, and reckoning. In 2021, a documentary filmmaker attempted to chronicle the Hollow Creek legend. Halfway through production, the project was mysteriously halted. Footage was lost, hard drives corrupted. The director declined interviews but released one still image, an overhead shot of the site taken by drone. In the image, the foliage appears to form 5 distinct lines radiating outward from a central blackened patch like the spokes of a wheel or the fingers of a hand. No one has lived on the land since the 19th century, yet strange lights are sometimes reported there, blue and gold, flickering like lanterns in a fog. When approached, they vanish. Dogs refuse to enter the treine. And every October 12th, without fail, the crickets fall silent, as if the soil is listening. Thestry of Hollow Creek is not a ghost story. Ghosts imply the dead are gone. Lingering echoes of a past resolved. What lives there is older, hungrier, something that does not fade with time, but deepens, burrows. Some harvests do not end with the season. Some reapings are eternal, and some names. though lost to history, are still spoken, not aloud but beneath breath, in ritual, in fear, because some cotton still bleeds.